Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
Good to see everyone. Sorry we got a little bit of a late start today, but there was one piece of the episode I thought was, there was a lot that was interesting in this episode, but one piece that I thought was, maybe it was because I was already thinking about it related to the time of year in Slichot, which is sort of intercessionary prayer. So during Slichot, which we don't actually start yet, but I taught about them last week, so I feel like I'm in Slichot mode. The end of Slichot, but if we were Sephardi, we would be saying them at this, at the end of Slichot, there's a section where we talk about, Machnise Rachamim, Machnise Rachamim, Lifnei Baal Rachamim, right? Sort of those who enter in compassion, bring compassion before the master of compassion. The way we understand it is we're asking basically angels to intercede on our behalf before God. And I was thinking about that in light of the scene of Roi praying at some grave of a tzaddik. We don't know who, but basically
it's probably Moshe or Aharon, because it said Moshe ve'Aharon bechoanav on it.
Wait, that's just quoting a pasuk.
No, I think that's what's on there. I mean, yes, it is quoting a pasuk, but I believe that I forget which one of their graves. I can look it up right now while you're still talking.
There is no grave of Moshe or Aharon.
I think that there's not we don't necessarily believe that we know exactly where they live. Where they're buried. But I do believe there is a place in Israel that you can go that's like emblematic of their death.
Really?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure. I can look it up, but I'm pretty sure I'm right.
I thought it was a tomb, not a cemetery.
Well,
yes.
right.
It is. Yeah.
I'll
look it up while you talk.
Look it up because that seems very strange to me. But
okay,
there's lots of strange things. No, often there's psukim that. I would not be surprised if it was someone named Moshe or Aaron or Shmuel. But anyway, but that idea of just the people who are in the past, but that idea, especially in Israel, we see it frequently of sort of like going to graves and praying. And there's certain different righteous people who are so often associated with certain miracles. And it's like, if you don't want to have a miscarriage, or, you go to this grave. And if you want to get pregnant, you go to this grave. If you want to shidduch, you go to this grave, right? There's like this whole, almost like a cottage industry around praying at the graves of tzaddikim. And, there was a big covering of sorts, right? But it was like a tomb. And they have often like these graves are sort of a big tomb. It's like a building. And, you go inside the building and you pray there. And, they even had a men's section and a women's section and so forth. Right. And these very much exist in Israel for, certain, often big rabbis or just, people like that. And I don't know, for me, I think that idea, it's one thing that we talk about how Judaism is different than other faiths who share some roots with us is like, oh no, but we don't do the whole intercession thing. Like we don't pray through intermediaries. We don't, and yet then we have this desire of people when they're really, want to pray on behalf of like a very particular, miracle or a very particular cause of like going to these particular sites, which is complicated, I think, Jewishly. And so we sort of wanted to bring that up. And here, for one thing, if people have experiences of going or knowing people who went to certain gravestones like this, and and just kind of talking about this as, we could look at it from a halakhic lens, but you could also just look from a desire to connect lens of this idea of praying at graves. Rabbi Schatz, have you ever prayed at a grave before? Or Mara Machpelah,
I'm in the middle of work of looking all these things up. Okay, first of all, I can answer your question though. First of all, it was definitely not Moshe or Aharon whose tomb he was visiting, because they are in the West Bank and in Jordan. And so my guess is that he didn't travel all the way there. And it also, based on the picture that I'm looking at, that's not at least the visual that they gave us in the episode. So I don't know which grave or tomb they were at. I'm surprised. Well, whatever, it doesn't matter. Have I ever prayed at so we went to Hebron when I was in rabbinical school studying in Israel. And I don't remember we might have davened near a tomb, but I didn't go to pray specifically at a tomb. It didn't speak to me. Well, so that's a very complicated question. So, you think they were in Jerusalem? Yeah, maybe. I don't really know. But when we went to Hebron, one of the things that you see is you see people going to these different matriarchs, patriarchs based on a value that they had, or a trait, or something that their character kind of shared with us or taught us as a quality, and that you would pray to that, again, matriarch or patriarch, for that particular thing. So whether that's fertility or kindness or hachnasat orchim, or, whatever, hachnasat orchim, bringing guests into your home, being welcoming, right? Different things that you might be asking to have a little bit more of in your own practice, or something that you really want, like having a baby or finding a spouse. You often see women specifically, I don't know about men, but women specifically go to Kever Rachel for both fertility and to hopefully find a spouse. Have I ever prayed at a tomb or a grave? No.
Well, Ma'ara Machpelah counts. Ish.
Yeah, but I didn't pray for me. We davened, I think, mincha, in the mechitza section of Ma'ara Machpelah, but I didn't personally feel like I was giving Rebecca Schatz prayers towards anything. I will say, very interestingly, that today, before doing this funeral that I did, because it was in Simi Valley and I'm not there very often, my uncle was buried in Simi Valley and I hadn't actually been back since he was buried. And so I went to his grave, and this has been a very difficult week for many rabbis, in terms of just what's happening with high holidays and all those kinds of things. And there's been lots of stress and lots of angst and whatever. And I went to go see his grave, not thinking that it would be any kind of prayerful experience, but definitely brought me a lot of calm and made me feel, supported in a different way. So it wasn't prayer, but I do think that people go to different grave sites or people that they knew or even maybe didn't know to be able to have those kinds of experiences, whether it's asking for something or just feeling something. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I'm looking at the chats here. No, it does. So Barbara points out that they were at Shmuel's grave, the prophet, which, like I said, I remember when I was in Israel being at Shmuel's grave, and that kind of did look familiar to me, so which would make sense, Vishmuel B'korei Shemo from that verse, right? So, it's interesting to think about miscarriage. I don't know if there's a connection specifically with Shmuel and miscarriage, but I think there's also a difference, when Rabbi Schatz, you're talking about, praying, or not even praying, just visiting the grave of a relative, right, versus someone who you don't know, but you sort of have this, right? They're sort of seen as an exemplar of certain qualities. Mm-hmm. We were talking a little bit before about, in the Catholic tradition and I mean, probably other Christian traditions as well, about like saints and like, are you praying to a saint, or is a saint a representative or a paradigm of certain attributes? There's like that complicated factor. I think even in this season where there's a tradition of kever avot, of going to a cemetery right before Rosh Hashanah, which I imagine is connected in some way to Rosh Hashanah, to sort of not asking them per se to pray for us, but somehow sort of having their, our relative zuchuyot, their merits, sort of help us as we head into the high holiday season. So there's an element of that I think is, makes its way into Judaism, even if we're not actively going to graves to pray there. Mm-hmm. That there is some element of that that's kind of held on to. I think there's also, in some ways a discomfort because of the ways that it can be misinterpreted and misunderstood by people who are doing so. To Renee's question, is Har Meron a grave site? Yeah, that's Shimon Bar Yochai, who his yortzeit is by tradition is on Lag BaOmer, and so you go to Meron on Lag BaOmer because that's Shimon Bar Yochai's place, and obviously there was a tragedy there this year, but there's that sense of like a power of connection with this person that I think that one of the challenges of Judaism is that we have a God who we can't see, and right, like it's hard to have that direct connection, that direct line. So it makes it easier, right? It makes sense why Christianity caught on. It's really nice to have a person you can look at and be like, that's the person I'm praying through or to or whatever, as opposed to a God that we can't see and hear and feel and so forth. It's a complicated religion. Yeah, Renee.
I think it's also similar to the certain sects that believe in like certain rabbis and like going to high rabbis.
Totally.
Remember when my brother was sick, someone sent me to speak to some Rabbi in Jerusalem, in like an area of Israel that was in some holy place. And yeah, so just believing in those people that believe in going for brachot, certain rabbis, and just reminded me of that. We did my son's hair cutting when he turned 3 at Marone, and it was a very enlightening experience to do that. It made you feel like you were in a holy of holies.
Well, yeah, making you think. This is like a conversation I had a number of times, in my chavruta with one of the Chabad rabbis here, because that's, in Chabad, right, 770, 770 was one place, but the ohel, the grave tent structure building of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right, is people go there all the time and they put notes in there and they get messages, there's a whole thing around that. And I think, the question becomes, okay, at what point does this begin to transition into something that's like, like where does that go?
Cultish.
So there's to what?
Cultish.
Well, cultish, but also like, how do you think Christianity developed? There was a rabbi who everyone really liked and respected, and they were, and then he, they say even after he died, we're still seeing him as someone who's sort of superhuman in certain ways, and then he becomes a Messiah, and then he becomes God, and then right, that's how religions develop. That's how legends develop. So there's a danger there of because when you are a person who knew an individual, and then you try to share to the next generations about this person who they didn't get to know, and then they share to their next generations, and so the people who didn't even know them share to, right? So the story is going to be embellished because that's what happens. Because otherwise, how do you convey to this next generation how special this person was? But there's a danger, of course, and that sort of the way the legend grows, and that it's not enough for someone to be the Messiah. It's you see that over the years, over the decades. Lubavitcher Rebbe died 20 something years ago. I forget how more than that, 30 something years ago. But that's sort of a nature of humanity, is to sort of to look at people in a certain way, to put all of this faith into humanity, which God is like, no, don't do that. Like, just come to me. I can handle it for you. But it's really hard. Like, we struggle with that. And even going back to the times of the Talmud, people would go to the cemeteries to pray. Right? There's a midrash that I brought earlier about Caleb when he's going up to Israel with the spies, stopping at Marad Machpelah to pray at the graves there, because he knows that the spies are going to give a bad report. So, and that's a story that's in the Talmud. So this is not something that's new. I think it speaks to a very human desire to be able to sort of connect with something that's more animate, or at least was animate, but it can be dangerous as well.
I think that one of the things that we do, and this is such an interesting topic to do at the end of a day where you've also had a funeral. I think one of the most interesting pieces of a Jewish funeral is that you go from real focus on the deceased to focus on the living. By the time you leave a Jewish funeral, you're focused on the living, not on the dead, right? You do Kaddish, you say Hamakom Yenachem as they're leaving through the lines, right? You do, all of those different pieces are now your focus is towards the living. And even when we do like Amisha Berach, or when you say Yisker, or any of those things, though they're bringing to mind someone who you've lost or someone who is sick, it's really about, and I say this about Misha Berach all the time, it's not just about you saying the person's name so that the rabbi can say that person's name and somehow the rabbi is going to have more of a connection to God for that person to find healing. You might very well believe in that, which is your prerogative. And I think that part of Amisha Berach is for the person sitting next to you or the person behind you to know that you're thinking of someone, and to also give them that support or give you the support that you might need in helping them heal. So one of the pieces that we do as a Jewish community that's very different from having that kind of, we were just talking about this a few weeks ago, like the iconography of whether it's actual Jesus or a cross, right? Of having something to hold on to that's personified, that we really focus on the interpersonal relationship. And even if you do go to a grave, that's really you focusing inward rather than you expecting that person to somehow from the grave be able to influence you in some way from the dead. So I just think that's a very powerful part of Judaism that I often say, I think the rabbis did a lot of things wrong, but they did a lot of things right when it comes to ritual around death and weddings and all kinds of different life cycles.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's, one of the things in Judaism is there's always this tension between, I think, the more rationalist and the sort of more mystical traditions. I was trying to Robert's comment because Maimonides is not very opposed to anything of this sort, going to graves, right? He's very much, there is one God, you worship God directly. Yeah. But there are all kinds, the sort of the more mystical traditions. There's even this idea that, you're allowed to ask your friend to pray for you. So like, if you could ask your friend to pray for you, like, why can't you ask your deceased parent or grandparent to pray for you? Right. Like, what's the big difference? There's this idea that all of Israel is connected to one another. And so like, perhaps, right, and this might be the differentiation between, the Machnisei Rachamim that we say in Slicha, which is to angels. And it's like, well, angel, now you're getting into like the divine sphere. That's problematic perhaps. But if you're saying to, you're going to your gravestone to see a parent and saying, Mom, I'm having a really hard time with all this. Can you just, ask God to help me out here? Is that so different than going to a living relative and asking them to pray to God on your behalf? Someone saying, no, there's not that much of like a clear line between like, once you're dead, you're dead. But like, right? We say, hey, nishmatot tzrua b'tzura chayim. May their soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. So what does that mean? There's sort of this idea that when someone's dead, their soul's not gone. They're still sort of around in some capacity. So perhaps there is a way to just ask for a favor like you would ask from a friend.
I think the Tehillim group is really interesting. I think that very often that also is, or if you take it to after someone has passed away, if you learn like Mishnayot, towards someone's Shloshim or something like that, which our community just did a little while ago, right? That there are these different ways that you could be connecting through your own focus of study or through your own kind of intention of prayer that is somehow then connecting, whether it's towards healing or just to the soul of that person having an aliyah, right? Having, reaching God, so to speak. So I think that, again, I think that it's super powerful. And I think that is something that people really connect to because it allows you to feel like that what you are saying is somehow helpful. And I would argue that I still think that's something that is communal, right? You as a community are coming together to say Tehillim, or you as a community are coming together to choose which Mishnayot you're going to do for somebody's Shloshim. That even if you're not studying them all together, or even if you're not saying all the Tehillim together, that you could bump into someone at shul and say, how has it been for you to be saying Tehillim for such and such a person? Or which Mishnah are you learning for so-and-so towards his Shloshim? So I think it's just a matter of like personal connection to this idea of how you find connection, without being redundant, to a person who has died, whether it's a person that you know, as Rabbi Pernick said, or a person that you didn't know. We got really deep real fast. Does anybody have any comments?
I was going to say.
Or thoughts?
I mean, there's one thing that I'll just bring in, which I thought was interesting. When I lived in Boston, I often, or when I would visit Boston, I had friends who went to the synagogue in the Maimonides school, right? So Maimonides is a big modern Orthodox school in Boston, sort of founded by the Rav Soloveitchik, who's sort of the leading modern Orthodox rabbi of the latter half of the 20th century. And, when he founded the school and the shul that's there as well. And it's really interesting that when he died, they kept his stender, and it's sort of like wrapped there in some way, it's sort of like it's, and like his seat and all of that, it's sort of like, it's there. That's like, and he died, whatever, 20 something years ago. But it's like, there's a spot for him in the shul. And I mean, I remember the shul that I went to, who was led for 40 or 50 years by someone who was like kind of a little, half generation later than the Rav. I remember when he died, and it was like soon after I moved to the community, like immediately people came and sat where he had sat previously. Which like in my mind was sort of like, it was this like, no, we're not, we're sort of like, we're not almost like worshiping the dead by sort of saying, oh, this spot is off limits because this was or this stender, like we're not using these physical tools as a way of connecting with these people, right? There are different ways that we talked about of connecting with saying Kaddish or so forth. And there, at the same time, there's something powerful about seeing that stender and being like, oh, that was the Rav stender. Like, that's where the Rav sat in David, or going to Marot Machpelah, I think. And like, I know for me, the first time I went there in Hebron, and I remember feeling like a connection there that was different. But I think there's something about being in such a place that. And maybe it's because you're aware of what this place is, but I think that there is something that is sort of like, well, people do feel a stronger connection. So do we say, I don't care that you feel the stronger connection here, that like, whatever, it's problematic and might lead you astray, right? Like, this is like Rabbi, Yeshaya Leibovitz used to like talk about the kotel. He called it discotel, and he was like, the kotel is like an idol, and it should be, knocked down and destroyed. Like no one should ever go to the Kotel because it's an idol and people are worshiping the wall rather than worshiping God, kind of thing, you know. And there's something to be said for that. Like, just get rid of them. They're leading people astray, and yet people feel a connection. So it's
Renee asked. Sorry, Karen asked. I think, so Renee, I think you mean Roe, but I think you're right. I think he was trying to connect just to something that was a higher power that was going to allow him to have answers to these questions that for him are deeply rooted in living a life that he feels like is already not okay, right? Which obviously in 21st century living, we would never have said you're having a miscarriage because of that kind of life that you're living. And I think he was looking for answers, whereas she's just praying that she's going to have a healthy baby. Rifki, is that her name? Sure. And then Karen said, was it kosher to touch? Oh, I hadn't read the first thing. I think meant kosher to touch the tomb. Was it kosher for the two of them to touch? A kosher, like what does kosher mean? No, they were not supposed to touch. He's married. He at least is Shomer Negiah. It's unclear if she is. It doesn't seem like she is because she seems to be hugging the poet guy. I think she was very calmed by the hand holding. Yeah. I think that there is something that we've seen throughout this entire series. I think there is this tension that the producers and directors are playing with of had he kept to himself and not allowed her to like show him that comfort, would he have felt as comforted? Well, if you're actually Shomer Negiah, you're not going to get comfort in those ways by someone who's not your wife. And if you aren't Shomer Negiah, then you might be, comforted in other ways by somebody, and that wouldn't have been the only way. So I think it's just a mixing of signals here that we're playing with throughout this entire series.
Right. There's a lot of stuff there. Right. Her inviting him up wasn't kosher. Him coming up wasn't kosher.
Yeah, I was actually I was surprised. I love that we're using the word kosher. I was really surprised that they didn't show us that the door was open or not. Because inviting him up is kosher, no matter what hechsher you use. He can come upstairs. He just can't be in a room with her alone.
Right. It's not ideal.
It's not ideal. It's like going to a vegan restaurant without it. It's like going to a vegan restaurant without a hechsher. It's like not ideal, but it's better than going to a treif restaurant.
What about
sure? There's lots of things that are not kosher, but are not the most unkosher. That is correct. Yes.
Okay, Rabbi Barbara.
Sure.
No, because what I was thinking when I saw what Karen wrote, I think it was Karen.
Yeah,
was that they have a very deep relationship.
Yeah.
She knows his deepest, darkest secret that even his wife doesn't know. And clearly, he went to her house, her new house. And he knew how to get there and he knew where he was going. And I think that his purpose is he wanted to talk to somebody who really understood him.
For sure.
And whether...
How did he know where to go? I didn't even think about that part.
I know, because they talked about it.
Does she not live there?
No, she lives there.
But then that was like the place she moved to.
Isn't that the new place?
That's what I thought. Yeah. No, I was like, how did he know where to go? That's a good idea.
You can write to the director.
One of those little details, but what I'm saying, I just think that not only was it a relief for Reut to let go of her anger about the poet, and probably some of her anger about his situation too. But it was also a relief for him. I mean, it was an opportunity for him to come back to earth and realize that he wasn't the person who, this horrible person that caused all these miscarriages.
Yeah. I mean, Rabbi Pernick can speak much more to this as a person who lives in that world. much more than I do. But one of the things that I often wonder for someone who is going to be in relationships with people, whether of the same gender or of the opposite gender, is how do you kind of decide those boundaries, right? How do you decide this is not a person, and like sexuality aside for just 1 second, how do you decide that I'm going to allow, this deep friendship, connection, all the things that you said, be something that allows me to be close to this person without concern? Or do you recognize that the law is saying no matter how you feel platonically or not about this person, they're the opposite gender and you shouldn't be doing that? And, I think that is probably, again, it's not a struggle for me in my life because it's not the kind of life that I live, but I do assume that for people who live a life of being shomer nagia, who have friends who are not, and find much comfort in those friends who do not keep the same laws, that is a hard boundary of how to kind of show a similar compassion, whether you need it or they need it, without becoming uncomfortable for the laws that you're holding by. Did you want to say anything, Rabbi Pernick? You don't have to, but
not really. I think it's a hard boundary either direction, right? Like, so much is about setting up boundaries for people who aren't shomer nagia, or not setting boundaries who aren't shomer, right? So everyone has their own boundaries, and sometimes they're like, well, I wish I had stricter boundaries or tougher boundaries, because then I wouldn't have allowed this to happen. So, right. So I think, halakha is one boundary, but I think in everyone's lives, there's, some setting and lack of setting of boundaries and crossing of boundaries that you thought you set and so forth. I think it's just sort of a nature of human relationships. Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that it showed the level of trust between Roe and what's her name?
Reut. No, Rivki.
Yeah. No, Reut. That they were so close. So I was surprised for a second that, she was inviting him upstairs, but to the apartment. But, it was the level of trust that, we have to recognize.
Yeah.
I mean, but they also had a romantic relationship. So, well, I don't know. Like, it feels,
that's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
Like, it's not, right? I mean, and I think, right, normally we would say, oh, they should have met at a coffee shop or something. But, like, he's married. So, like, right there, in some ways, there was no, like, there was no modest way to, like, go talk to his ex-girlfriend when he's married. Like,
you can talk to people once you're married.
Not in that, if you're Haredi and married, to go talk to your ex-girlfriend, not really. Like, there's not
in a public place. What?
No, it's, you don't talk, because I think people typically don't talk to women in the social settings. Meaning, if you have a therapist who's female, that's one thing. But
is he that socially?
Yeah,
he is.
Yeah. So okay. I mean, is he? He's. Yeah, I would say so. I think in the Orthodox world in general, it would be looked at as strange if you're married and then out socially with a woman who's a contemporary, who's not who you're out socially with. Like, that's kind of unusual and would be.
Wait, hold on. I have to go in a second, but there's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. If not you, I won't throw you under the bus. If one of our friends who was married and they happened to be in Los Angeles and I wanted to get coffee with them because they're my friend, just because now they're married, that would be frowned upon?
I mean, if people saw them who knew them and we were like, that's not his wife, and it's clearly a social outing, yeah, I think so. In the firm world, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. That is shocking to me in the 21st century. Like, the people can be friends, especially in a world in which you could have. I mean, Roe is a good example of this. Roe had a very different religious life before he was married to this woman, right? So, especially in today's world where you have no idea what the history was before you met your partner, you might have tons of friends that just because you're now married to someone, like you're not trusted enough to just go to have coffee or have lunch with another person in a public space. And that seems silly.
I mean, I think often people will go out in groups or sort of, we'll go out with, the three of us or but yeah, I think it would be definitely uncommon for someone to go out socially with a female friend if they're married to someone else. I think if especially if they're in the community where people know them, that would raise a lot of eyebrows for sure.
Well, on that really exciting note, I'm going to go and disagree with you no more than I ever have before. But it was lovely to see you all, and I'm sorry that I have to go, and I'm sure that Rabbi Pernick will continue this lovely conversation.
Or any other conversation you want.
You can decide whether I'm right or he's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Rabbi,
She has to go. I'm still here though. Yeah, any thoughts on, that or other things? So Rachel asked also, in a frum community, do many people have many close friends of the opposite sex? Yes. I think that's basically the same. A related question. I think often couples, right? There's couple friendships that like, we are friends with this couple, but I think in a frum community, typically there's like sort of like the Srugim set of people of like young singles who are friendly and friends with one another. But I think when people get married, it's sort of, and this is what I was saying and she was disagreeing with, but it's sort of like young singles can hang out and like young couples or families hang out. But for someone who's married to then go out with a single friend or to go out solely with with the wife in a couple that you're couple friends with, like that would sort of be, I would say, unusual in the frum world. I think even like not like just in the Haredi world, and even in the modern Orthodox world, that would be unusual. Yeah.
I just think he was so upset, and the subject was something he could not talk to anyone else about.
100% agree. Yeah.
Anyone else, and I think it was out of friendship and comfort. That
absolutely, and that's why I'm saying I think it was sort of he needed to be reassured and comforted. He knew she was the person to do that, and this is how the conversation started. Like there wasn't any socially appropriate way for him to do so. He couldn't give her a call and say, "Hey, can we go out for coffee?" Because if someone saw him with her, they would be like, "Wait, that's not his wife. Like, what's going on here?" Right? So it was sort of like. He basically said, you know what, I'm just going to go to her apartment and get reassured there in a way that's not kosher, quote unquote, because essentially there was no kosher way for him to go approach her. So he was in a bind, and I think ultimately got reassured in the ways he was seeking, and sort of made that decision in the moment of, I know this isn't halachically acceptable, but I need to talk to someone who gets me.
They didn't have to touch, though.
They didn't have to touch. Once you've crossed that line, now what other lines?
Wait a minute. He put his hand. His hand was on the table.
Yes.
She, not from the same, took his hand. He did not respond right away. He thought about it. He looked at that. Blah 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 blah. So then
he didn't pull it away either, Karen.
What?
He didn't pull it away.
That's true. No. Both is correct.
What she should have done.
I thought about that he would do that, but he really needed connection, I guess. I won't tell on him.
It's hard. I think for, where he is, he's repressing this part of himself in the life that he's leading here. He had that mentor before, but that guy kind of fell away and went off derech to some extent. So he doesn't have that kind of mentor relationship. He doesn't have a therapist to, he doesn't have that person who sort of played that role in his life. But she's now an ex-girlfriend. So he's kind of stuck. So you feel for him because he doesn't have anyone to talk to about these things. It's really hard. Except Nati. He doesn't talk to Nati about those things, I think, as well. Rachel's talking about how that conversation was healing to Ru. I think Yeah, I think that was a really nice. I mean, it's a little bit of a sad conversation, but I think it felt like a healing conversation. I think you're right that this was healing for him to feel like I'm not a terrible person. And I think it was healing for her, even if the healing part was sort of getting back together and seeing him and being sort of reminded of what like a nice pure soul is like. And it was sort of like, oh, this guy Azaria is like, I wasn't actually interested in him. Like it sort of allowed her to tap back into those feelings she had for Roi and realize she didn't really have any of that for Azaria. It was more of like a celebrity crush, right. This was a great Nati moment, in that, right. He asked Nati to go bring her some food, and Nati ended up hanging out with her and spending time with her, and like, right. So I think that was this was a great Nati moment where Nati, as mean as Nati is to his brother, you see the love that he has for him and the way he's taking care of him, and lying about what, where his brother is and so forth. And she knows that he is, but she sort of knows that he's doing it from a place of caring for Roi. So there were a lot of things there where it's like, you're crossing lines. He's lying, but it was sort of from this kind of sweet, innocent kind of place, which was nice. We definitely do see not to be a mensch. We know he has it within him. He has his issues with his brother, but we didn't, how much he loves his brother. You can see that's why he cares so much about
him. I thought it was very touching when he kind of covered up, not knowing where Roi was. Mm-hmm. Not saying, oh, I don't know where he is, but saying, oh, I sent him home to get some sleep. Mm-hmm. That whatever Roi was dealing with, Nati was
covering for him,
providing cover for that in a way that to me felt generous.
Yeah. I mean, and then he told the story about the dog house and sleeping in the dog house. And she was like, I know you never had a dog growing up. Still, it was sweet. It's like, I know you're not telling the truth here, but like, she wasn't mad about it though. It was like, it's a nice story though. Right. So I think, she knew that he was covering for his brother, and yet it was sort of like, I'm okay with this. I know you're not telling the truth, so that's okay. But I agree, Barbara. Okay. So I think, we do end up with where we've never actually seen Nati interact with his sister-in-law before. And I think you see this sort of, as much as Srugim often ends on like a sad note, there is that positive, it comes from a place of sadness, but you see sort of that familial connection and, that closeness there. And like, as much as there's messed up relationships kind of all around, like there is that deeper love connection underneath it, as much as Nati's mean to his brother, as much as, as all this stuff is going on. And I think when you see Roi come back, you see Roi wasn't looking for, a romantic relationship from Reut. He's not leaving his wife. He just needed that reassurance. And when he comes back, you feel like, he wasn't like cheating on her, even like emotionally. I think he was going to his therapist, as it were. It happens to be his ex-girlfriend.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.